Hi, and welcome to our webinar. I'm Roger McClendon, Executive Director of the Green Sports Alliance, and we're in our webinar, Back in the Game, How to Choose a Sustainable, Safe, Performance-Based Mask for Players, Staffs, and Fans. And I'm here with my expert panel, so thank you for being here, expert panel. I'll start off with Jane Foreman, who's the Director of Marketing for Aries. Also, Leah Ford, who's the Global Marketing and Communications Manager with NatureWorks. And Dave Rousse, president of INDA, the Association of the Nonwoven Fabrics Industry. Again, thank you all for joining us today. I also want to take this time to also thank L&S Captioning for providing closed captioning for today's session. More information on how to use this service is included in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. You should be seeing our videos and the slide deck on your screen. And if you'd like to resize either the video feed or the slides, feel free to toggle those settings to your own personal preference. Today's webinar's recording will be sent to all attendees. And for GSA members that would like to see webinars from previous years in our members' archives, visit our YouTube page for a public access to our webinar recordings. We're excited to announce our upcoming 2021 GSA Summit, which will be held virtually June 22nd and 23rd. Information on the topics of the sessions, the speakers, and registration are all available on our Summit website. If you're interested in learning more or being a part of the Summit, feel free to email our team at info@greensportsalliance.org for more information. Now, we'll have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, but feel free to send your questions live via the questions box, and we'll do our best to answer all the submitted questions. Our agenda today is the ASTM Performance Standards by Dave Rousse. What is a good mask? Because all masks are not created equal. So we'll find that out from Jane. And then we'll get into this whole conversation, which is a big issue. And we've seen it at the very emergence of this pandemic, is how can we be more sustainable and integrate sustainability with this safety and performance of a mask? And that circularity conversation will be led by Leah Ford today. So we're looking forward to that. So let's think about the quality of the fan experience. You know, we're all connected to this sports, you know, and we really want to get the fans back in the stands as soon as possible, but safely. So how can we engage and enhance the customer experience and accelerate us to get back to cheering on our teams that we love so much? And so part of the discussion will be to make sure we have the proper PPE and how we define that. So with no further ado, and our focus on health, wellness, and safety, I'd like to turn it over to our expert, Dave, to take over from here. Dave?
Hey, thank you, Roger. Welcome, everyone. I'm Dave Rousse, president of INDA. INDA is the Association of the Nonwoven Fabrics Industry. We don't make the masks, and we don't make anything. We're the association. But my members make the media, the filtration media that goes into high-performance face masks. And I wanted to talk to you today about a standard that was recently developed because we were running out of media for the high performance face masks, which were needed for the medical area. And now we've got a standard for general population face mask, which actually do provide protection. And I'd like to go through the development of that standard and what it may mean for you. Next slide. So here's what I wanted to cover today. Why do we need this standard? How did the standard come about? What does the new standard require? What benefit does it provide to folks like you? And how will it help me safely manage my facility? Next slide. So first, we want to recognize that there are various kinds of facial barrier coverings out there. The first one on the left is the respirator. That's the granddaddy of them all. Many of you know it as the N95. This is the highest performing personal protective mask that exists. And it's meant for surgeons and people working in high dust areas in the workplace. The benefit of this mask is it provides almost perfect seal around the nose and the mouth so that all of the air coming in is going through the filtration media and all of the air going out is going through the filtration media. These are made with a non-woven material called melt blown, which was in pretty scarce supply when the pandemic started. We've come a long way since, but they're pretty well reserved for the medical community, the N95s. Next are the ubiquitous blue rectangular pleated masks we see around. Those are actually medical face masks. They have a coating on the front to prevent blood from getting to the doctors or the nurses when they're treating patients. And they do have a pretty good filtration performance to them. However, they're loose fitting, so there's a lot of leakage on the side. So not all of the air going in or going out is going through the filtration media. Third is the barrier face covering, and this is the item that's covered by the performance standard that I wanted to get into in just a minute. The intention here was to provide both a layer of protection on the exhale, so that those around the wearer are not infected by a virus, but also provide the wearer with some protection on the inhale, so that we're not breathing in the virus. So that's what differentiates this barrier face covering from the one on the left, the medical face mask. It's the sealing ability around the nose and chin, so that again, most of the air breathed in or breathed out is going through the filter media of the mask and is not being let loose through the sides or the edges. And then on the far right is what many people wear and think it's doing any good, and that's a cloth gaiter. It doesn't have to be a gaiter, it could just be a cloth mask of any kind. It could be a sock wrapped around your head. But with no guidance and no guidelines or standards, anybody wearing anything over their face would have been allowed into facilities that required face masks. That was one of the problems we were trying to solve. Next. So here's the need. As the pandemic started, there was a call for the wearing of face masks by the CDC, but there was no performance requirement for the face masks. Anything would do. I would go to the grocery store and see people wearing handkerchiefs or pulling a t-shirt up over their nose and satisfying the requirement for some kind of facial covering in order to go into the store. The problem is that the COVID aerosols are very, very small, very small. Matter of fact, they're so small that the current, prior to the new standard, the current mask testing processes use very large particles to qualify their masks, those AST, the medical masks. But the COVID aerosols are very small, so we needed a new test method that took into consideration the size of the COVID-19 aerosol, not the size of the large droplets. And then there was the problem of getting folks to wear a mask. It's the old Witham principle. What's in it for me? If the reason I have to wear a mask is to protect somebody else because they think I'm infected, then there's nothing in it for me. So this standard was meant to produce a level of protection for the wearer. Now I wear the mask and I'm protected. So there is something in it for me. I'm more likely to wear a mask that meets the ASTM standard than I am a mask that does not. And then lastly, another reason for developing the standard was the scarcity of the melt-blown nonwoven used in the high-end N95s and the need to preserve that material for the medical community. So we needed to get a standard in place that qualified something below N95, and we called it Project N80. Next slide. So here's how Project N80 came about. Again, the CDC recommends face masks be worn in public, and there are many job positions that have a lot of time when the job holder is in contact with the public and is therefore exposed and has a need for protection. We're talking about bus drivers, cab drivers, cashiers, front desk personnel, wait staff, hours of exposure, and they need some protection. With the N95s needed for the healthcare sector, what should these people wear? They don't need the 95% particulate filtration efficiency in most cases, something less, but something nevertheless. And we had a lot of nonwoven media that was not the very scarce melt-blown media that needed to be preserved for the medical community. Why couldn't we use this other well-performing nonwoven media to make masks and save the melt-blown for the medical community? To do that, we needed a performance standard. So we at INDA approached NIOSH, which is part of the CDC, and they said they couldn't do it. It would have to go to ASTM. And we said, well, that's going to take an awful long time. And NIOSH said, no, it's not. because we're the ones that run that committee. So we collaborated and we got done in 6 months what normally takes a year, and delivered the ASTM standard F3502. Next. So here's what the standard covers. First, it covers submicron particulate filtration efficiency. So now we've got a standard of filtration efficiency, blocking the bad stuff from coming in or blocking the bad stuff from going out. The higher values, the better. Secondly, we had a measure of airflow resistance, which can also be related to comfort. That is, how much pressure is required to move the air through the filtration element of the face mask, and how much pressure is required to breathe air in. Again, the lower the pressure resistance, the more comfortable it is. However, these two often are inverse. In other words, the higher filtration performance is usually associated with higher pressure to push the air through the tortuous path of the filtration media. The easier the breathing, usually the less the filtration performance. So it takes some developments in material science to balance the two, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later. And then the third thing that this standard applied to was leakage. Again, the medical face masks had good filtration through the media, but a lot of leakage through the sides. This standard now requires a certain level of fit around the nose and the chin. Next slide. So here's a little graph, a continuum to kind of correlate the elements of filtration performance and breathability. The better performance is going to be on the right on both bars. So you can see in the upper bar, filtration performance. On the far right end, you see the vaunted N95 as a reference point being way out there. And you see on the left, the cloth masks being very, very low in filtration performance. On breathability, it's just the reverse. The cloth masks perform very well on breathability, but very, very poorly on the filtration performance, while the N95 has got the great filtration and much less easy to breathe through. Next. So what's the use of a standard if nobody applies it? Again, the standard can only be effective when made a requirement by a controlling authority. And you folks running event arenas are a controlling authority. You can set the rules for what people have to enter your facility. Next. Early this year, there was an executive order issued by the president on January 21st, soon after he got inaugurated. And this had the potential to be a game changer back at the time in early January when people were still scrambling for protection from the COVID-19. The president asked that OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, consider whether any emergency temporary order standard on COVID-19, including with respect to masks in the workplace, are necessary, and if they determine such a standard to be necessary, to get it issued by March 15th, in less than 2 months. This executive order informed the pace of our work on the ASTM standard. Now, as it turns out, next slide. As it turns out, we finished the standard in February, but OSHA never responded to the executive order. Imagine that. They were asked for a yes/no answer, and they still haven't given a yes/no answer. But since then, CDC guidance has advanced, and they're advising that no mask is needed if people are vaccinated, but they're silent on whether masks are needed if somebody had COVID and still has the antibodies protecting them in their body. We hope that that comes out pretty soon. So this issue as to who has to wear a mask, who doesn't, is still evolving, but we're seeing a growing awareness and interest in ASTM F3502, the new standard, by labor unions of all kinds and by managers of large offices, and we hope by people such as yourselves who are managing arenas where large gatherings of people are to take place, and those people being close together. Next slide. So lastly, I would just say, if it were me, in other words, if I were in your shoes, what would I do about this? First, I would establish a policy that to enter my arena, you need to be wearing a mask that meets this new ASTM F3502 rating of some kind. You can't just wear a sock wrapped around your head. And I would set reasonable performance criteria. And at a minimum, and there's a wide band of performance criteria you can set it at, and you get to determine what the filtration and breathability levels would be. I would set them pretty low, filtration at 20% and above, and level 1 breathability, 15 millimeters of pressure or below. And I would also ask that these masks have a very tight fit around the nose and chin, again, so the air breathed in and breathed out goes through that filtration media. Next. That's it for me, so I will take questions at the end. I appreciate your attention, and now I'll turn it over to Jane Foreman for the next session. Jane.
Thanks, Dave. That was an excellent covering. I think Dave was really focusing on the why we are doing everything and kind of covering what's going on in, I'll say, the political world. I'm going to kind of cover the what is going on. So what you want to look for in a mask. So this ASTM standard, which we need and will need moving forward in the future as other pandemics come along or continued coverage for COVID. It's the first voluntary standard. And think of it as an SPF. I know when I was young, you just went out and you bought a suntan lotion. But pretty soon they figured out that suntanning wasn't good for you. And you really should have a guide for how you should buy suntan lotion. So that when you went into the store and you bought an SPF 60, you knew exactly what that meant. And you knew what risks you were taking on yourself. The ASTM standard does the exact same thing, and anyone who's complying with the ASTM standard should be able to give you a third-party testing facility's rating on how a mask performs. So, as Dave said, it generally addresses the particulate filtration, the airflow resistance, labeling requirements, which is one of the things that we think is so important for the mask, because like an SPF 60 on a bottle of suntan lotion, you can pick up a mask and see how it's labeled and know what you're getting. And then it also addresses requirements for reusability. So as I mentioned, it does require product packaging, it requires how to fit, it requires washing instructions, should the mask be washable, or even disinfecting instruction if the mask can be worn for more than 1 day. And it also addresses the fact that face coverings should be made with non-irritating, non-toxic materials, and also shouldn't pose any kind of flammability hazard. And as I mentioned, all masks should be tested by a third-party independent testing lab. There's 4 or 5 in the country, and they're in the process of testing a lot of masks right now. Next slide. So one of the important things about protection is the fit. So if you're feeling that if your glasses are fogging up because you're wearing a mask, it's more than just the annoyance of your glasses fogging up. It actually means that particulates can be escaping. And it also means that moisture is escaping your mask and being directed straight into your eyes. So we've talked to optometrists lately that have suggested that we have new conditions going on with the wearing of masks, something called mask associated dry eye disease. So more and more people who are not wearing properly fitting masks are getting very dry eyes if they have to wear this mask over an extended period of time. And mask fit as far as size of face and pleating and ear loop size, all of that is something that these masks are tested for. And one of the things that we saw early on with masks is a lot of people put vents in the side. Those are an absolute no-no because it's really just directing very concentrated levels of the virus out. Most of these vents and valves really don't filter a mask. So what do you want to look for with protection and fit? you want to look for a mask that goes well under your chin. This is something that a lot of the surgical masks don't do, and why you see when people are talking, the masks go up and down and off the nose. So you want a bigger size mask that goes from nose to chin. And the other really important thing you want is a very, very sturdy, what we call a double nose wire. And this will, using 2 fingers, you can really fit the mask to the top of your face to get any of the upper leakage. And then just with fitting the ear loops over your ears with a simple twist, you should be able to get a very tight mask fit. Next slide. Okay, so after you get fit, probably the next most important thing is that filtration. And what does filtration mean? That's the particles that can enter the mask and exit the mask. So even if you're vaccinated, I don't know, the jury's still out on this. You still want to protect other people from any particulates that are leaving. And that includes even, I think last year you saw that very few people got colds or the flu. So masks are used to prevent more than just COVID. The flu rates are very, very down, and regular flu is a deadly disease too. So you want a mask that can filter these. And one of the things you'll see with cloth masks, if anybody's a textile person, you know, if you look very closely at a t-shirt or, you know, just a regular shirt, it's either knit or has a warp and weave, and that's going to create holes. And you'll see in the next slide, we show that the size of a COVID particle is 500 times smaller than a human hair. And the one and only purpose of a airborne COVID particulate is to find a host. So even if you have several layers, that little virus is going to try to find the holes in any environment so that it can reach a host. So you're going to want to look for a mask that not only doesn't have cloth involved, but probably has a melt blown or a spun bond fabric as part of it, because those fabrics will have a static charge that will also capture the virus. So the testing that's going on right now is testing to see if particulates the size of a COVID virus can make it through a mask. Next slide. Okay, so here's an example of the size of particulates. And if you see all the way down to the little red circle almost at the bottom of this diagram, that's the size of a coronavirus, 500 times smaller than the human hair, which is at the top of this. So if your mask is filtering coronavirus, it's also filtering pollen, it's filtering dust particulates, and even down to wildfire smoke. The 2 that are smaller than COVID, Zika is a bloodborne, so your mask, you don't need a mask for bloodborne viruses, and bacteria can come in many forms. So coronavirus, this is why it's so deadly. It's such a small particulate, it can make it through lots and lots of masks. Next slide. Okay, so filtration, as Dave mentioned, we're talking about the barrier face covering. So this is the standard that we're wanting arenas and people to look at. You want to see level 2 starts at the 50% level. That means it's filtering at least 50% of the particulates out there. Your body can handle a little bit of the particulates, but once you get over a certain virus load, you can't filter it. This is what they're calling a safe mask. Level 2 is kind of where the cloth masks are. And then the respirators, these are, they're actually judged by a different standard, but they're going to have the high filtration. Again, as filtration goes up, for the most part, most masks are looking at way lower breathability. And this is where it comes to be very important in sports, in that it's no good to wear a high filtering mask if people are going to be tugging at them while they're either at a game or playing or coaching. You never want that mask to leave your face while other people are around you. Next slide. So the other factor that's really important, as I said, is as filtration goes up, typically breathability goes down. There is a new technology on the market that is a combination of spunbound and made by NatureWorks, the NGO PLA, and that creates a very durable mask that also allows you to breathe. So if you actually go to the next slide, I'm going to show you where the breathability, yeah, these layers are. So a cloth mask is going to be very, very comfortable in breathing. It's probably going to be in the 7 or 8 range. An N95 respirator is probably going to be way off the chart in the 35 range. And this means that it's not going to be comfortable to wear for any extended period of time. So you want a mask that can filter and also be breathable. Again, it's very hard to find a mask that can do both. And this is why the ASTM standard was produced, because they were encouraging manufacturers to develop masks that allow you to do both, so that you can be both comfortable and protected inside of any arena. Next slide. Okay, and with breathability comes communication. One of the most important things, and we've seen in the last year, people have had to wear masks, players, coaches, and in the stadium. So most masks that are very protective, if you put an N95 on, you can't hear what the other person says. That's going to be very, very important in sports. If you're a player, and this is going to probably address more of the youth audience than it's going to be addressing the professional audience, because they have slightly different rules. But a lot of the youth still have to practice and play with masks on. And if you're passing a ball, or soccer, volleyball, basketball, you want to be able to hear what the other person is saying. So with that breathability, you're going to want to test a mask and see how it communicates. Literally put it on and see if people can hear you. There are masks out there that are protective and allow you to communicate. And then for the fans, I'm sure you've all seen fans in the stands who literally pull off their mask to scream and cheer and then put it back on. That completely nullifies what the mask is for, which is to protect the people in your stadiums and stands. If they have a mask that is breathable, comfortable, and safe, they're going to leave it on. They're going to forget they have it on, and they're going to have a really high fan experience. Okay, next slide. Okay, and this is just kind of a overview of what Dave was talking about earlier. Filtration and breathability, there's usually a trade-off. So you'll see with filtration, cloth masks are pretty low on the scale, whereas N95 masks are pretty high on the scale. But when you flip it over and look at breathability, N95s become very uncomfortable to breathe in. Cloth masks become more comfortable to breathe in. And one of the technologies that we wanted to point out, I know this isn't supposed to be a sales pitch, but there's a new technology out there that was developed by Aries and NatureWorks. And what it's done is combine multiple biopolymers to create a mask that does both. So you can actually achieve what you want to do all in a single mask. So next slide. Okay, and then finally, reusability, and Leah's going to really talk more about this. The medical masks, the blue masks that you see everywhere, are pretty much single-use masks. You wear them once, and I'm sure anyone who has a stadium has seen dozens, hundreds of these masks just dropped in a parking lot. So you're going to want to look for a mask that actually has some sort of reusability factor. The technology that's been developed actually can last for 40 hours. So should you give away a mask at a stadium, it can be worn for the game and then an additional 30 to 35 hours after the game. So a branded mask can then go out and people will know somebody went to your experience. So it's really important that a mask do all of these: fit, filtration, breathability, reusability. A mask that lasts 5 days cuts your waste down by, 75, 80%. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to touch just briefly on how you know it's a good mask. So ASTM is part of their standard. Once you've passed all the tests, you are supposed to label your mask that it meets this ASTM F3502 standard. So it's been highly tested. If your mask says this on it, it should come with product packaging that identifies the manufacturer, where it was made. There's a huge concentration to be made in America to protect our supply chain for any future pandemic. It should include instructions of how to wear it, how to disinfect it, and should your mask get spoiled, you should probably replace it. Those should all be in the instructions, and that it meets the ASTM F3502 standard. Next slide. Okay, and then finally, one of the biggest problems that we've seen in masks in general is that there are a lot of counterfeits out there. When ASTM first came out, a whole plethora of sites came up saying, hey, we're ASTM certified, and there is no such thing as a certification from ASTM. You comply with the ASTM standard, you pass the testing, and then you have the ability to label your mask. ASTM will not endorse a mask, they will simply set the standard. So ASTM has been really good at monitoring their own counterfeits. You just have to put in KN95 and counterfeits, or N95 and counterfeits, and you'll see that across the board, this is a huge problem in the industry, and that we're being flooded from non-USA masks that really don't meet any standard. And that can be actually very dangerous in a hospital settings. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Leah, and she's going to talk about sustainability.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. So as Jane and Dave have really well covered, there are a lot of considerations that go into choosing a mask that can provide the appropriate performance characteristics and safety levels for people. But as we've been looking at new mask designs and as masks have been scaling up to market, obviously the close second question is, what about sustainability and what about circularity? So next slide, please. Now, when we're looking at how people have been choosing masks right now, at the consumer level and even basic PPE that's been purchased by businesses, there's been a lot more focus on things like fit and comfort, or what does the mask look like, as opposed to having standards for filtration and breathability, which is why it's nice to see ASTM standards being developed so that at the very base level, you can choose a mask that meets a certain level of safety. But next slide, please. So once you meet that level of safety though, and because that's been missing and sort of at the consumer mask level, people have been making choices based on what is the mask made of. Sustainability has been part of the discussion and part of how masks have been marketed to the public. Do you want to choose a natural material like cotton, hemp, bamboo, silk? And is that safer for me or better for the environment if I choose a reusable mask made from these materials versus maybe something that is single use and made from a synthetic material like polypropylene, PET, polyester? So sustainability and the choice of materials has absolutely been part of the conversation. It just hasn't been matched up with the filtration and the performance level of masks so that we can make decisions based on how does a mask perform and what is it made of. That's where at NatureWorks, we saw a really interesting position for biopolymers like INDA, is we can bring sort of that sustainable angle, but then the question was, can we also bring in the idea of sustainability, performance, and circularity? So next slide, please. And that's where, when designing new materials for masks or really anything, it's really helpful to have these sorts of frameworks. So this is the circular economy framework that was put out by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation as part of their New Plastics Economy initiative. And what it's really designed to do is help us scale new products, adjust current products so that we can achieve the idea of a circular economy for all of our materials. And this particular framework has three important ambitions. First, create an effective after-use economy for materials. That means find a pathway that works, whether it's chemical recycling, mechanical recycling, reuse, compostability. The second tenet is to dramatically reduce leakage into the environment. So how do we prevent litter? How do we prevent masks from ending up in the parking lot? And third, how do we decouple plastics from fossil fuel feedstocks? Or how do we decouple all of our materials from fossil fuel feedstocks? And when considering masks, it's really easy to go after kind of two of these tenets of the circular economy, and that is trying to incorporate bio-based materials and designing masks that are better for reuse. So again, marrying those components of sustainability and circularity with the performance that's needed from a mask. So next slide, please. And often this sort of idea of sustainability and performance have been a trade-off, you know, to be able to get something that's sustainable, maybe you don't get the same level of performance. But what we've been seeing across our product development, especially in masks, is that by using bio-based materials like NGO, you can achieve performance levels that you couldn't get from incumbent or petrochemical-based plastics alone. And that's been really exciting to see. So you're able to get that performance and you're able to incorporate these principles of sustainability and circularity without sacrificing safety, breathability, comfort, all of those key attributes within a mask. So next slide, please. And this is really what's governed how we've been able to design these new materials. So with the onset of the pandemic, of course, all the material manufacturers, as Dave noted, were looking for new processes and new ways to provide more materials for filtration media. And NatureWorks was not alone in that. And I think in the Green Sports Alliance circles, we're really well known for our efforts in zero waste, compostability, food serviceware. But we also have a side of our business where we work a lot on fibers development for everything from apparel to tea bags. And we were able to leverage some of that technology to be able to create new materials for masks. And we did so knowing that we want to operate within that construct of the circular economy and go after decoupling from fossil feedstocks. We want to go after improving reuse. And that's where we had a partnership with the Nonwoven Institute from NC State University to be able to create a new material that achieved both these performance attributes and the sustainability, so that it doesn't have to be one or the other, and that you're able to get a level 2 mask for filtration, a level 2 mask for breathability, but you're also able to get sustainability principles that don't just work for us, but kind of fit with these larger frameworks out there in the market. So yeah, it's really exciting to see that all come to fruition. And so that's most of what I had on sustainability. So I think we might have some time here for some Q&A.
So thank you, Leah. Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Dave. A great presentation. So a lot of good stuff. So as far as Q&A, are there any questions on your side, Leah, that you think would be worthwhile addressing, especially as COVID, as we talked about, is kind of coming to its end of the cycle? We're still a long ways, you know, from getting it eradicated for sure. But what should we be doing to kind of, you know, leverage this technology right now from your perspective?
Absolutely. And that brings me to a question I wanted to posit for Jane and Dave, which is, you know, as obviously mask requirements and how they're being used in everyday life is changing, how do you see it evolving for PPE, for staff, for workers, and used in those scenarios? Because those sorts of requirements are going to require people to wear masks for long periods of time to be able to do their job and stay safe, versus necessarily what we might be doing in the general public. So do you see those requirements growing, sticking around, coming back more in the fall? What do you see in the future?
I think there's always going to be a part of the population that now that they've gone through this, there is going to be a part of the population that will wear masks. It's something I think we in America used to laugh at, and now we're kind of embracing it. I think I mentioned, masks protect more than coronavirus. They do protect against other things. We also have we do have members of our population that are immunocompromised. And I think it's really important for, Dave, you mentioned this, for authorities to really kind of work with the masks and populations and realize that embracing it and allowing their staff to feel comfortable and not getting into the vaccine wars and the mask wars. So I think you are going to continue to see masks. I don't know what coronavirus is going to bring. I know NIOSH came out this morning supporting ASTM. So I think you're going to see, especially workplaces, embrace a mask culture because of the, I know CDC has said that we don't have to wear masks if we're vaccinated, but then that kind of imposes people asking, are you vaccinated or not, which gets into the kind of vaccination wars. So just kind of go with the flow and not make mask a discriminatory thing and let people wear masks if they want to. It's almost better to, I'm vaccinated, but I still wear a mask everywhere I go, and not just because I have a lot of them. I do it to kind of protect other people too.
Mm-hmm. I've got a question for Dave. You mentioned ASTM was going to announce, the kind of the adoption of the standard. Could you expand on that and what that process might look like? Any projections there?
Yeah, sure. So the real challenge coming into this pandemic was twofold. One, the manufacturing of the high performance masks that everybody needed was about 85% in Asia. And domestically in the United States, we did not have a footprint to make these things. Now, COVID hit everybody, so the Asian countries included. And as soon as it hit, they embargoed exports. And we were left without a supply and without a domestic manufacturing base for face masks of the high performance kind. So that's a problem we don't want to see ourselves in again. And that's a situation I think we've remedied based on the hard work done in the last year and a half or so. The second thing is that the government required everybody to wear face masks. But as I mentioned earlier, there was no quality or standard of performance for those masks. You could wear a fishnet over your face, and that would be considered a facial covering, allowing you to go into the grocery store. So the development by ASTM of the standard, and by the way, they did it in record time, is really a significant advancement of a performance requirement for the facial barrier covering, not just wear a facial barrier covering. So I think, as we're coming out of the pandemic now, the need for these masks and rules is starting to diminish a bit, and that's good. We got to be prepared for the next situation. We were so woefully inadequately prepared for this one that it really exposed ourselves. And I think now we've got good bricks and mortar in place to prepare ourselves for the next one.
Gotcha. And you think OSHA will step up and give us a little more direction as we move forward?
I do, Roger, but not right away. I think they're going to have to see an itch that needs to be scratched before they make a move. And
Gotcha.
Right now, they don't want to exacerbate the situation, which seems to be improving. But
Gotcha.
should we have a relapse or should something else come in? I think they have the gears well greased to do something rapidly.
Gotcha. I guess I'll throw this one at Leah, because we love the fact that NGO has been integrated into this technology with Aries, around that sustainability, which, there's such a big, challenge of these things landing up in landfill, is there a way to kind of think about what that sustainability impact is between Jane and Leah to say how much more beneficial it is to use this technology? And do you think over time we'll get to a mask that is compostable, or can be put back into a reuse situation?
No, those are great questions. So just by substituting a bio-based material like NGO for a petrochemical plastic, you can reduce the carbon footprint by 2/3, which is a dramatically lower carbon footprint, and really speaks back to that tenet of the circular economy about decoupling from petrochemical feedstocks. So that's really nice. But then you look at waste, and really with PPE, and you consider safety, hygiene, reuse, and being able to safely reuse a mask as long as possible keeps those materials in use, makes the greatest value out of them. And I think that's really where our efforts are focused, because being able to compost a mask, while that could be nice to be able to get rid of those materials, composters are in the business of creating beautiful compost, and that requires food waste. So when we're designing new applications, we're really focused on applications that go to compost are ones that bring food waste with them to those compost piles. So if there is a way that a mask brings along a bunch of old nachos, then we have a conversation. But until such time as that happens, I think driving towards reuse is really important. And reuse, as seen by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and other organizations who work on circular economy frameworks, reuse is an incredibly important principle, because there are situations like with medical and hygiene products where we don't want to send those to a compost environment, or recycling infrastructure is not a fit for that material.
Thank you. Great answer. And then Jane, I had this on my mind. Branding is still very important to these leagues and teams. And what's the capability with your production to be able to not only provide the sustainability aspect, the breathability, and the high performance, but how do you address branding when you look at your products?
Yeah, sure. We do have the ability to add logos, either by an ultrasonic kind of brand on the mask, which would probably be right up here, or actually printing on top of the mask. I really personally like the printing on top of the mask. It's kind of like going to the Super Bowl and coming home with a Super Bowl hat. Once you've been there, you want to have something to come home with and wear on the street so that people know that you've been there. So you're really giving, if you were to brand a mask and hand it out like a rally towel in an NFL game or a hockey game or something like that, what you do is you allow people to then take it home and wear it for another, with the current mask that we've worked with NatureWorks, it lasts for another 5 days. So you've got the ability of kind of the brag factor after the game. And then while they're in the game, you've just got this enormous ability to kind of create that joined spirit of everybody wearing the same looking mask. Usually when you look at a football game, everybody's in the same color. But now that we've added masks, you have like a sea of red jerseys or purple jerseys, and then all different color masks. Wouldn't it be great if we had, a purple mask that could then be worn at a Vikings game? Call out to Leah.
Absolutely. I know that's exciting, and I know a lot of our members love to give those giveaways away to kind of engage with the fans, and this could be part of that. So hopefully we get some interest as we continue to talk about this conversation. Talk one more for you. Talk about production and how do we handle that? Because stadiums are pretty large. You may have 70,000 fans, or it could be small where they're just looking at their staff and just looking at their players and kind of the administration that run the stadium. So can you balance between production runs and those kind of things from high volume to kind of small volumes?
Yeah, I think the wonderful thing about our partnership with NatureWorks and the Nonwovens Institute is we've created this new technology that can be made in America. As Dave mentioned, our big kind of wall that we hit with PPE when the virus first hit was melt blown. 85% of it, I think that's the right stat, Dave, is made outside of the country, so that we had this shortfall of the ability to provide high filtration masks. Rather than kind of reinvent the wheel, the Nonwovens Institute just turned everything on its head and said, we're going to create a new technology that works as well as the melt blown. It's still a spun-bound fabric that does create this electrostatic charge, but it can be made in the US. It can be made in very, very high quantities, and there's no restriction of creating millions of masks in a month. The other thing that Dave mentioned is a lot of people stepped up to the plate and created American-made masks. So the ability to create the fabric, we've eliminated that. We've got plenty of fabric. We also have lots of facilities that have extra machine time. So we can put production in place across multiple companies that want to create this sort of technology very, very quickly. So there's really no limit to the amount of masks we can produce.
Gotcha. And then on the low end, if there was the samples, or like you were doing an event, a lot of times we host greening events, and part of that is the PPE. So can we do smaller runs? Is that difficult to do if we wanted to only do 250 or those kind of smaller runs? Because that's when you're getting with the tooling and the printing. I know that's kind of from the price point. Can we handle that, or what's your thoughts there?
The branding probably has to be done in what we call kind of a donut size. So that's going to be, it's going to be less than 3,000, so 2,500. But we certainly can work with lots of people to do creative things. We're coming up with a new technology with this ultrasonic weld that actually just imprints your logo right on the mask. That can be done in very low quantities. Okay. So the technology is constantly developing, as is the fabric. I just wanted to mention that too. Right now we have a balance of the petrochemicals and the NGO PLA. We can actually increase the amount of NGO PLA, which is actually reducing the carbon footprint even more. We haven't done testing on those masks yet, but anything we can do to reduce the carbon footprint is something that we're really playing around with right now.
Gotcha. So back to Leah, to kind of tie this back together from a circularity standpoint, and maybe we get Dave back involved, but kind of what do you foresee as next as we kind of get through this pandemic? Where are we going from here?
Yeah, I think as Jane noted, continuing to evolve the technology. I mean, this is something we all started really putting our heads against in the spring of 2020, and to see how fast standards have evolved from ASTM, how fast materials innovation has evolved. I mean, we're all just getting started on putting together these materials in this supply chain. So in the next year or two, or, God forbid, when there's another pandemic, we're going to be more than ready, both with supply and new technology, so that masks are low friction for people to adopt when we need them, so that they're easy for workers to use, and that we aren't going to create more of a waste problem using single-use products. We're going to create things that are even more durable, that filter at higher levels. So I think we're just going to keep leveling up. You think about some of our best products have taken 6 to 10 years of great product development, and we're into about a year and a half on this one. So I think there's a lot of runway for innovation on these particular masks to achieve both performance and really nice goals for low carbon footprint and circularity.
Absolutely. And Dave, your thoughts just on what we should be looking out for in your industry, and then I'll come back to Jane to kind of have the last word.
So as with any boom and bust situation, it takes inventories to smooth out the demand curve. So we've been working with the government on a national stockpile of personal protective equipment to prepare us for the next time when we get a sudden onslaught of demand for this equipment. And we've also been encouraging that when federal dollars are used to purchase personal protective equipment, that those dollars go to American-made products, not to foreign-made products. So there's still work to be done in this arena, but I do think that The tide went out and exposed a lot of rocks in our security system, and we're now patching them up, and we'll be ready for the next one real soon.
Excellent. Well, we definitely all want to get back to live events. We are excited to have ours next year. We're working on that to kind of get people back together. In the meantime, we'll be safe with these virtual events and kind of combination of protecting ourselves through vaccinations, which we highly recommend, and through the right PPE, the ones that work. And then Jane, just from your side, you know, kind of the last kind of word, you know, where do you see us leveraging this to get to the, not just to the fans in the stands, but to the everyday consumer? Because I think your product is fantastic. I've actually used it. So
Yeah, I think you know, when we talk at Aries, we get very excited that we actually are seeing the coronavirus, the current coronavirus, you know, death rates are down, cases are down. We're getting back to normal. So it's exciting to see that, but we know we can't stop because we don't know what's around the corner. And we're really dedicated to working on what the next thing will be. To Dave's point, you know, the stockpile. I don't think this is going to be the last pandemic we're going to see. And also just for that feeling of safety for everyone involved. Masks are something that people have embraced. So, you know, understanding that not all masks are equal and that there are superior choices out there, and they're going to get better and better. And we're going to have a stockpile, and we're going to wipe out Corona. It's all good news.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we really want to get fans back in the stands. At how they want to come back. You're still going to have a good percentage of your people with masks in the stands. So it's exciting times.
well, I'd like to thank our panelists, Leah, Jane, Dave. It's been a pleasure. I mean, I've learned so much myself. I'm sure our audience has too. And then we have this recorded so it can go back out to members that weren't able to make it today. I look forward to seeing you guys in the stands of your favorite teams like the Minnesota Vikings coming up. And I do really appreciate all the effort and hard work to kind of support the Green Sports Alliance and all that you do. Health and wellness is a big thing that we're focused on as we made our pivot. And then we obviously, with the context of the circular economy and sustainability and bringing all those things together is very important. So thank you all, and thanks again. So we'll close out unless there's any more questions from anybody before we close out.
No, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.